For 33 years, I carried a polished leather briefcase into a glass-paneled corner office, convinced that the day I walked away at 55 would be the day my real life began. But on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 years later, I caught my reflection in the living room window at 10 in the morning, holding an unread home improvement magazine, realizing that my phone hadn't rung once in 11 days. I was 58 years old, healthy, financially secure, and completely invisible. Outside, the neighborhood garbage truck hissed as its hydraulic arms lifted a plastic bin, emptied it, and set it back on the curb. I had spent the last 45 minutes tracking its progress from house to house. I knew the driver took a short break at the end of the cul-de-sac. I knew the blue house on the corner always forgot to put out their recycling until they heard the engine. I was an executive who used to oversee $40 million in commercial lending portfolios across 4 states. Now the highlight of my morning was watching municipal waste disposal. From the hallway behind me, I heard the sound of keys jingling. My wife, Clara, was putting on her raincoat. "Are you heading out again?" I asked, turning away from the window. "Just to the library, Bob," she said gently, not meeting my eyes. "And then I'm having lunch with Martha." "I could drive you," I offered. "We could grab lunch together instead. That little Italian place by the park is open." Clara paused, her hand resting on the brass doorknob. She gave me a look that wasn't angry, but weary, the kind of look you give someone who is standing directly in your light without realizing it. "Bob, you went to the garden center with me yesterday," she said softly. "You came to the pharmacy with me on Monday. I love you, but I need to run my errands by myself today." The front door clicked shut. The house went dead silent again. I stood there in my fleece slippers, feeling a cold, hollow knot tighten in my stomach. I hadn't retired into paradise. I had retired into a vacuum, and in my desperation to fill the silence, I was suffocating the woman I loved. To understand how a man with an enviable pension and a paid-off mortgage ends up feeling like a ghost in his own hallway, you have to go back 30 years. I grew up watching my father work himself into an early grave. He was a shift supervisor at a steel fabrication plant in Ohio. He worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and constantly told my brother and me that rest was for the weak. He had a massive heart attack at 61, exactly 4 months after receiving his gold retirement watch. His sudden death marked me. I promised myself I would never let a company consume my entire existence. When I entered corporate banking in my mid-20s, I developed a singular obsession: early retirement. While my colleagues leased new luxury sedans every 2 years, Clara and I drove used Hondas. While other executives bought vacation homes in Vail, I maximized every retirement account, reinvested every dividend, and tracked our net worth on detailed spreadsheets every Sunday night. I had a giant number in my head: 55. 55 was the magical threshold. At 55, my pension would fully vest, our investments would yield enough passive income to maintain our lifestyle, and I would finally be free. In my mind, work was a transaction, a temporary sentence you served so you could earn the right to exist without demands. I viewed retirement not as a new chapter of life, but as an endless weekend where every morning was Saturday, and no one could ever ask me for a report again. On my 55th birthday, I handed in my official notice. The bank threw a lavish farewell reception in the executive dining room. There was prime rib, champagne, and speeches from younger loan officers who called me a legend for beating the system and walking away early. My regional director shook my hand with genuine envy. "Bob, you won the race. You're getting out while your knees still work and your mind is sharp. What are you going to do first?" "Whatever I want," I laughed, raising my glass. "Absolutely nothing at all." The first 6 months felt like an intoxicating victory lap. Clara and I spent a month traveling through southern France and Italy. We rented a villa, drank espresso in stone courtyards, and slept until 9 without an alarm clock. When we came home to Denver, I bought a brand new set of golf clubs. built a cedar planter box in the backyard, and spent entire afternoons reading history books on the patio. Every Monday morning, while traffic backed up on the interstate heading into downtown, I would sit in my kitchen with a hot cup of coffee, look out at the Rocky Mountains, and feel a deep sense of smug superiority. I had beaten the grind. I was free. Then, the first year came to an end. The novelty of having nothing to do began to peel away like cheap wallpaper. Travel is wonderful, but life is lived in the ordinary weeks between trips. You cannot stay on vacation forever unless you want to feel permanently untethered. Golf, which had once been my favorite weekend escape, quickly lost its flavor when I began playing 4 times a week. A hobby is thrilling when it is a hard-earned reward at the end of a 60-hour work week. When you have 6 open days ahead of you, a bad round of golf isn't a relaxing break. It's just 4 frustrating hours of chasing a little white ball to kill time before lunch. My regular golf partners were mostly men in their late 70s who were content to ride in the cart and talk about their cholesterol medications. I was 56. My body was strong, my mind was restless, and after 18 holes, I would get back into my car and realize I had 5 hours of daylight left with nothing to accomplish. Worse, Clara was still working. She was a high school biology teacher, deeply passionate about her students, and had no intention of retiring until 62. Every morning at 6:45, Clara would pack her lunch, kiss my cheek, and head out the door with purpose in her stride. She had a lesson plan. She had 30 teenagers counting on her. She had colleagues to debate curriculum with in the staff room. I had the morning paper and an empty house. By 10 o'clock, I had read every article, folded the laundry, and emptied the dishwasher. The silence in the house was staggering. When you spend 33 years surrounded by the hum of phones, the clicking of keyboards, and people knocking on your office door asking for decisions, the sudden absence of sound feels like sensory deprivation. In the corporate world, I was Robert Harrison, a man whose signature authorized million-dollar commercial developments, a man whose judgment was trusted by board members. In my empty living room, I was just Bob, a middle-aged man wondering if it was too early to eat a ham sandwich at 11:15 a.m. To cope with the creeping irrelevance, I began trying to manage the only environment I had left, our house. I started creating spreadsheets for our grocery spending. I reorganized the pantry using clear plastic bins and a label maker. I timed the sprinkler zones down to the exact second. When Clara came home from a demanding day of teaching AP biology, exhausted and wanting to unwind, she would find me waiting at the kitchen island, ready to deliver a 30-minute operational report on what I had adjusted during the day. Clara, if we buy the laundry detergent at the warehouse club instead of the local market, we save 14 cents per load, I announced proudly one Thursday evening. Clara set her tote bag down on the floor, took a deep breath, and looked at me with an expression that broke my heart. "Bob," she said quietly, "I don't care about the 14 cents. I just want to sit on the couch for 10 minutes without having a committee meeting about the laundry." I felt a surge of defensiveness. "I'm just trying to help, Clara. I have the time now." "I know you have time," she replied, her voice tightening. "That's the problem. You have so much time that you're turning our home into a branch office, and you're treating me like your junior staff." The words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't being cruel. She was speaking the unvarnished truth. I had taken the habits of a corporate executive and applied them to a peaceful marriage simply because I had nowhere else to channel my nervous energy. Desperate for connection, I arranged a lunch downtown with Mark, a former vice president who had worked under me for a decade. I took the light rail into the city, wearing a sports coat for the first time in 18 months. I felt a surge of familiarity as I walked through the granite lobby of the bank tower. We sat at an upscale steakhouse where the waitstaff used to know my name. But from the moment we sat down, the dynamic was completely broken. Mark's phone buzzed on the linen tablecloth every 3 minutes. He answered quick texts, apologized repeatedly, and talked rapidly about a hostile takeover the bank was financing, regulatory headaches with federal auditors, and office politics that had shifted since my departure. When he paused to ask about my life, I leaned forward, eager to share. Well, I put in a new drip irrigation system in the garden, I said, and I've been reading a fantastic biography of Ulysses S. Grant. Mark smiled politely, nodded, and glanced at his watch. That's great, Bob. Really living the dream, he said. His voice carried no malice, but there was an unmistakable distance in his eyes. To Mark, I was no longer a player on the field. I was an alumnus visiting the locker room, someone to be treated with polite deference, but no longer part of the real game. The lunch ended after 45 minutes because Mark had an emergency conference call. I paid the bill, walked out into the bright afternoon sun, and realized that the world I had spent 33 years mastering had closed ranks behind me the second I walked out the door. The corporate train kept moving at full speed, and it didn't care who was left standing on the platform. That realization led to the darkest winter of my life. I stopped playing golf entirely. I stopped going downtown. I spent my days in old sweatpants, sitting in my leather recliner, scrolling through financial news websites and checking stock tickers that didn't need checking. I was waiting for my life to begin, without realizing that life doesn't happen to you while you sit in a chair. It requires participation. The turning point arrived 6 months later, on an unseasonably warm Saturday in April. Clara and I were walking through a regional park near Morrison, Colorado, trying to enjoy the sunshine. The trail had been damaged by heavy spring rains and snowmelt. Deep ruts and fallen boulders made the path difficult to navigate. Ahead of us, a crew of about a dozen people was working on the hillside. They were wearing heavy work boots, yellow safety vests, and hard hats. Some were swinging pickaxes to cut water drainage ditches, while others were using pry bars to maneuver 200-pound rocks into place to build a stable stone staircase. I stopped to watch them. Leading the group was a man with a thick white beard, easily 10 years older than me. He was laughing as he helped a younger woman roll a granite slab into alignment. There was mud on his pants, sweat dripping down his temple, and an unmistakable look of fierce, joyful focus in his eyes. I walked up to the edge of the path while Clara stopped to tie her shoe. "Looks like heavy work for a weekend," I called out to the older man. He looked up, wiped his brow with the back of a canvas work glove, and grinned. "Best workout in Colorado, friend. And unlike a treadmill, when I go home today, this mountain will have a trail that stays for the next 50 years. I stood there, looking at his muddy gloves and the smooth stone steps they had just built. "Who do you work for?" I asked. "Nobody," he chuckled. "We're volunteers with the Colorado Trail Foundation. We come out every Thursday and Saturday. You want to swing a mattock? We're short 2 hands today." I looked down at my clean hiking shoes, my pristine fleece jacket, and my soft, uncalloused hands. "I don't know the first thing about trail building," I admitted. "Can you lift 20 pounds and follow directions?" he asked. "I think so." "Then you're qualified. Grab a pair of gloves from the red tote by the truck." I turned back to Clara. She had been watching the entire exchange. There was a faint, hopeful glimmer in her eyes that I hadn't seen in over 2 years. "Go on, Bob," she said with a gentle nudge. "I'll walk back to the car and read my book." I took off my jacket, put on a pair of oversized leather gloves, and spent the next 4 hours doing manual labor on that mountainside. We hauled dirt, crushed rock with sledgehammers, and aligned stone retaining walls. By 3 in the afternoon, my lower back was aching, my shoulders burned, and my knuckles were scraped raw. When we packed up the tools, I stood at the bottom of the slope and looked up at the 40 yards of reinforced trail we had built with our own hands. It was solid. It was functional. Hikers with children and dogs were already walking over the stones we had laid. That evening, Sitting at the dinner table with Clara, I ate 2 bowls of stew without once looking at the kitchen clock. When my head hit the pillow at 9:30 p.m., I didn't lie awake worrying about the emptiness of tomorrow. I fell into the deepest, most restorative sleep I had known in 3 years. That afternoon on the mountain cracked open a truth I had spent decades avoiding. I had assumed that human happiness came from the absence of effort. I had spent half my life working toward a state of complete inertia, believing that freedom meant having 0 responsibilities. I was wrong. The human mind is not built for permanent rest. We are purpose-seeking creatures. When you remove all friction, all deadlines, and all meaningful demands from a person's life, you don't give them freedom, you give them atrophy. The following week, I signed up as a permanent volunteer with the trail crew, committing every Thursday to trail maintenance. Working with my hands gave me back physical vitality, but my brain still needed a challenge. I didn't want to go back to banking, but I didn't want 40 years of financial knowledge to rot in my head either. A fellow volunteer on the trail mentioned SCORE, a nonprofit network that pairs retired executives with small business owners who need free business mentoring. I submitted an application, went through their orientation, and was assigned my first client 2 weeks later. A young couple in their early 30s named Marcus and Elena, who were trying to open a custom furniture workshop in North Denver. When they walked into the small library study room for our first meeting, they were terrified. They had incredible craftsmanship skills, but their cash flow projections were a disaster. Their lease agreement had dangerous penalty clauses, and their local bank was on the verge of rejecting their equipment loan. They opened their laptops, spread their messy financial notes across the table, and looked at me like a drowning swimmer looks at a life preserver. "Mr. Harrison, we don't know what we're doing wrong," Marcus said, his voice cracking with stress. "If we don't get this financing approved by next month, we lose our workshop deposit and our entire savings." I looked at their numbers. For 33 years, I had analyzed balance sheets exactly like theirs. Within 10 minutes, I spotted the 3 structural errors in their loan application that were triggering the bank's automated rejection flags. "Take a breath, Marcus," I said, leaning over the table and pulling out a yellow legal pad. "Your business model is solid. Your formatting is just speaking the wrong language to the credit underwriters. Here's what we're going to do." For the next 3 hours, we rebuilt their 3-year revenue forecast line by line. I taught them how to structure debt amortization, how to negotiate equipment leasebacks, and how to present their collateral properly. 4 weeks later, Marcus called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Bob, we got approved," he yelled into the phone, his wife cheering in the background. "The bank approved the full credit line. We pick up the keys to the shop on Friday." I sat at my desk in the study, listening to their unbridled joy, and felt a tear slip down my cheek. During my 33 years in commercial banking, I had approved hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate loans, but I had never felt a fraction of the fulfillment I felt in that single moment. For the first time in my life, my knowledge wasn't being used to generate quarterly dividends for shareholders or hit performance bonuses for senior management. It was being used purely to help 2 young people build a livelihood with their own hands. Over the next 5 years, my life reorganized itself around a completely different architecture. I didn't need an office building or a corporate title to have a life of significance. I built a weekly rhythm that balanced physical effort, intellectual contribution, and personal rest. Tuesdays were dedicated to mentoring small business owners through SCORE. Thursdays were spent outdoors on the trails, swinging tools and laying stone with people of all ages. Mondays and Wednesdays belonged to Clara and me gardening, cooking, taking long walks, and traveling without the hurried panic of trying to escape work. When Clara retired from teaching at 62, she didn't find a lost, hovering husband waiting to micromanage her retirement. She found a partner who had already built his own independent foundation of purpose. We didn't crowd each other. We had separate stories to tell when we met at the dinner table each evening. I am 68 years old now. It has been 13 years since the day I walked out of that corporate tower at 55. In the corner of my home office, my old leather briefcase sits on the bottom shelf of a bookcase. It is covered in a thin layer of dust. Right next to it, on the floor by the back door, sits a pair of heavy leather work boots, caked in dried Rocky Mountain mud. Every time I look at those two objects, I am reminded of the long, painful detour it took to understand what retirement actually is. Society sells us a dangerous lie about aging. It tells us that the ultimate goal of life is to cross a finish line, put our feet up, and consume entertainment until our time runs out. We are told that leisure is the cure for exhaustion. But the hardest lesson of my life was learning that aimless leisure is far more exhausting than honest work. Retirement does not automatically give you peace. It simply removes the external schedule that masks your internal emptiness. If you do not know who you are without your business card, an empty calendar will not liberate you. It will expose you. True freedom in retirement is not the absence of responsibility. It is the freedom to choose what you are willing to give your time and energy to. It is the privilege of waking up and deciding to be useful, not because someone is paying you, but because the world still needs what your hands and mind have spent decades learning. Most Tuesday mornings now, I wake up at 6:30. I brew a pot of coffee, pack my yellow legal pad and laptop into a canvas bag, and head downtown to meet with young entrepreneurs who are just beginning their journeys. As I drive past the corporate high-rises where I once spent my youth, I don't feel anger, regret, or envy. I feel gratitude. I spent 33 years learning how to build things that belong to other people. Now, in the quiet second half of my life, I finally learned how to build a life that belongs to me. If you've experienced the transition into retirement, or if you're currently wrestling with finding your rhythm and purpose after stepping away from a long career, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Navigating these major transitions is never as simple as the brochures make it look. And if this reflection brought you a sense of perspective today, please like the video and consider subscribing to join our community for the next story. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember that your value has never been defined by your job title.